EU-Philippines Framework Agreement on Partnership and Cooperation, accession of Croatia, and the first speaker will be Mamikins. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I wanted to support the conclusion of the framework agreement. The first issue takes account the accession of Croatia. This is already 3 years since Croatia joined the European Union, and still there are many agreements, including also international documents, which are not accordingly amended, taking into account the changes in the territory of the EU. I do hope that all the international instruments will be amended so that Croatia can take part, because Croatia is a fully fledged member state of the EU. So I voted in favor of this report. Thank you.
Mr. Polčák.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Just like to say that I wanted to speak on the next point concerning the Philippines, about the trade strategy. But since the first point also concerns the cooperation between Philippines and the EU, you could accept my statement at this time. I supported both of these reports because the Philippines and the whole southeastern region in general is a strategic region for the EU. It's a region that is in development, that needs our assistance. We should try to prevent violent, very often Islamic terrorist groups that undermine the civil administration in this region. What we should try to do is to help the public administrations in the Philippines, some support, although we should perhaps wait after the election of the new Philippine president.
And the next, the partnership between the EU and the Philippines, the framework agreement. Mamikins.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Relations between the EU and Philippines are developing very dynamically, and it is already for the last 10 years. There are quite good results in the trade area, also cultural and religious cooperation, and there are 1 million Filipinos that reside in different member states of the EU, and conclusion of this agreement will stimulate further cooperation and development of our relations. Taking into account the future potential of the relations, I support the document, and I believe that the relations between the EU and the Philippines are on the right track, and there is good future for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, on the EU-Philippines Partnership Framework Agreement and the resolution, Mamikins.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. During 40 years, the European Union has provided assistance of about €1 million to Philippines with the aim to increase living standards and fight poverty, and to support the poorest groups of the society. And €325 million were allocated to this assistance. And in the year 2007 till 2013, there were additional assistance allocated. So there's quite substantial support, and we supported the rule of law and also inclusive society through creation of jobs. These were priorities for support. All these areas are very topical for the European Union. Sometimes the European Union is quite successful to fight poverty also in the territory of the EU, and we are ready to share our experience also with the Philippines.
Next, the macro-financial supplementary aid to Tunisia, and the first speaker is Kuitschuk.
Thank you, President. Tunisia is not only the home of the Arab Spring, but it is also the only Arab state with consolidated democracy. Its constitution guarantees the rule of law, the fundamental rights and freedoms. And what is more, there is a well-developed and stable civil society. Europe has played a vital role in establishing democracy and stability in Tunisia. Under the European neighbourhood policy, the country deepens its relationship with the EU and gets financial help. Due to the efforts of the Tunisian people, it is now possible to establish a privileged partnership with the EU. Unfortunately, the instability in the region and the threat of terrorist attacks damage the tourism and the fragile economy. In these difficult times, I feel that the EU should show solidarity. That's why I supported the macro-financial assistance to Tunisia. Another 500 million euros will improve its budget and will create a better business climate, which will definitely bolster the economic growth of the country.
Next, Mamikins.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. A few years ago, there was a revolution in Tunisia, and this led to certain reforms. The aim of the reforms to modernize the rule of law, social life, and economy, and other areas. Still, there is lack of stability, and due to that, it is impossible to implement all the reforms. So there is another occasion to pledge support. This time it is 500 million euros that will be given to Tunisia as a loan on rather favorable conditions. A couple of months ago, similar assistance was given also in the form of trade subsidies, and knowing the importance of Tunisia geographically and also a specificity of relations, it was very logical to vote in favor of this report.
And then Mr. Pospisil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I gladly supported this resolution because I believe that it is in the geopolitical interest of the European Union for Tunisia to remain a rather prosperous and democratic country. Yesterday we talked about migration and cooperation with North African and Near East countries, and that we can fight against the causes of migration in this way. The support for Tunisia is certainly part of the picture because it's one of the few countries in North Africa that is more or less stable and relatively rich. The country has some economic problems because there are not so many tourists as they were before, so it is good to help them bridge the gap. Thank you.
Next speaker, Mr. Maulu.
Edustaja Maulu.
Maulu.
Thank you, President. I believe this resolution has meaning going well beyond the considerable economic aid to Tunisia, which is going through great problems at the moment. It is a very clear statement from the European Union to the whole Arab world, consistent aid where democratic conditions prevail, as in Tunisia, the only Islamic country which has this, proper and substantial assistance to send a message that the European Union is watching very carefully events in the Mediterranean at a time where there is a split between Sunni and Shiite. This is considerable support against terrorism and support for people in the Arab world in democratic terms. So for the many reasons given underlying this economic aid, there is a further
I voted against the resolution on macroeconomic assistance. The new government hasn't managed to improve the situation of the economy. So the country is going towards a Lebanization, and the Islamists participate in the political life. And Tunisia is the basis for slave networks, for illegal movement of refugees and illegal migrants. We see that ships arrive at Lampedusa and also in Crete with desperate people. So we should demand measures against illegal immigration, and we cannot support their olive oil producing sector while at the same time our producers in Greece and Italy become poorer and poorer. That is why we're against the abolition of duties for 2016 and 17 for olive oil imports, because this has meant a collapse of prices in Greece, which means even more poverty for our producers. Thank you.
The next topic is rules against certain tax avoidance practices. The first speaker is Ms. Sandra Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Madam President. There is a report from Oxfam talking about tax avoidance and Spanish companies in particular. The fact that there's been such an increase in tax havens during the crisis. The Bank of Santander is in fact one of the main entities profiting from the current situation. Now there have been sanctions because there was a company used in order to try to avoid tax. There's also La Castellana. We're talking about decades of tax evasion and a loss for the Spanish state, and at the same time we have people who cannot enjoy their social rights, their labor rights, their public services, and this is because we've had to spend all this money on bank bailouts. The European Union really needs to put an end to this kind of phenomenon, and you need to be firm on this. We need to adopt a clear standard in order to avoid tax avoidance and in order to make sure that this phenomenon is curbed. This report is unfortunately not sufficiently strong on that point, and that's why I abstain.
Mr. Mamikins.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Primārajiem kaitekļiem, es teiktu, efektīvas ekonomikas un citu sfēru attīstībā, un, piemēram, starptautisko uzņēmumu agresīva nodokļu plānošana ik gadu valstu budžetiem rada zaudējums no 100 līdz 240 miljārdiem, bet tie cipari ASV dolāros. Un tas sastāvdā no 4 līdz 10% no visā pasaulē iekasētas ienākumu nodokļu summas. Skaidrs, ka gadījumā, kā ar to pašu PVN pievienotas vērtības nodokli, kur pastāv vienotais minimums, pārējo nodokļu likmes nacionālajā līmenī paliks.
There is proper translations.
Yes.
Does it work now?
As I was saying, as in VAT, where there is a minimum base, there is no base for other taxes, and therefore it's the competence of the member states. And since it is not set at a union level, we require a more coordinated policy and a set of measures that would allow us to develop a unified strategy for other taxes so that tax avoidance is not possible. Therefore, I supported this directive.
Mrs. Dodds, not present. Then we will go to the second issue or the following issue. Parlamentin 11. helmikuuta 2015
Follow up to the resolution of Parliament of 11 February 2015 on the U.S. Senate report on the use of torture by the CIA. Mr. Mamikins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Of course, fighting terrorism is not possible only through democratic means. Sometimes we have to act very aggressively in order to punish the terrorists. On the second hand, this brings dishonor that we have prisons on EU territory where people are being tortured. And I invite Romania, Lithuania to provide a transparent and efficient criminal investigation about the CIA secret prisons. The same regards other cases of cooperation with CIA, and therefore I voted for. This is a very timely and necessary document. Such experiences cripple our cooperation with the US, and I would like to reiterate that I voted.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda, space capabilities for European security and defense. Mr. Mamikins, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. At the beginning of the 21st century, there was a very dynamic development of all the technology, so it's impossible to ignore the development of space. In the EU and its member states, mainly space capabilities are used for development of technologies. I don't encourage the defense aspect in the space, but still we have to investigate the situation. Maybe there are some other potential areas where we can use our space capabilities. Fight against terrorism, Galileo, Copernicus programs, and their further development, innovation, science, all this fosters our development here in the EU. So for those reasons, I of course supported the report by my colleague.
Thank you, Ms. Macovei.
Thank you. Militarizarea spațiului a devenit.
Militarizing the space has become a big risk. The development of anti-satellite technologies, including orbitary weapons, can be used by terrorists and other non-state actors. The report identifies cyber threats for the spatial programs of the European Union. For instance, altering the source that sends data package that might endanger military operation and that might have consequences on life on Earth. We should have coordinated and rapid reactions to this. We should always cooperate, us, the European Union, with the US and NATO. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Mélenchon.
Alors voilà un rapport tout à fait étonnant.
This is an astonishing report because it, one at the same time, proposes autonomy in terms of space policy, and a bit further down the same paragraph makes some bizarre affirmations saying that the European Union ought to be extending its cooperation and coordination with the NATO alliance and the US. The US, which is aspires to be the guarantor, together with NATO, of stability in Europe, and at the same time we've just voted on a CIA torture and rendition report. So the European Union is contradicting itself. It ought to be focusing on demilitarizing space because this is the furthest frontier of humanity at the moment, and it should certainly not be the locus for remilitarization and extensive militarization at all. And it is also essential that we should recognize that there are huge implications here in terms of the refugee.
The next speaker is Mr. Korwin-Mikke. The floor is yours.
Dziękuję. Rozumiem, że pan Mélenchon obawia się założenia więzień CIA na Księżycu.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Mélenchon is scared about CIA organizing prisons on the moon. Now, I'm against this resolution, particularly point 24, because first of all, it does leave the way open to create a European army which would deprive us of the remaining autonomy that we have as member states. And also, because if we draw on our space experience, the result of our work can be deemed to be negative. So I think militarizing space is just sending missiles towards the United States or Russia, which would lead to political complexity, and I think the European Union should.
Next, resolution on space market update. Mr. Mamikins.
No? Ir. Liels paldies jums, priekšsēdētāj.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The technological base of the EU is one of the most developed in the world. And this equally refers to the space question, and maybe such countries as the United States, India, Russia, and Japan have somewhat bigger capacity compared to the EU's capacity in the outer space. And I would like to ask the Commission to develop a comprehensive strategy, which unfortunately doesn't exist at the moment. This strategy would be focused on short-term and long-term perspectives, and these initiatives could help the EU to safeguard the global leader's position in the market. From this initiative, everyone will benefit, because space market is linked with absolutely all the areas of life in the EU. Thank you.
Next resolution, situation in Venezuela. Ms. Rees.
Our resolution is what it is, President. I voted for it because I think it's really important for us to express our solidarity vis-à-vis people who are suffering, but it's a bit lukewarm. It doesn't say much. It's very much watered down by the compromises. Imprisonment, assassinations, crime, corruption, and all the shortages, water, electricity, medicines, everything is, they're short of everything. And Venezuela, after all, is rich, it has oil, and yet the people are hungry. It is an absolute disgrace, the Maduro regime. Now, we talk about sanctions. Sanctions are still on the table. I think we need to adjust our attitude in order to allow for a democratic transition to take place. But I think that the position advocated by others is not tenable. Also, Antonio Ledesma is one of the political prisoners. He was elected mayor of Caracas directly. We're thinking of him, we're thinking of his family, and we ask Mrs. Mogherini to do whatever she can as on behalf of the Commission to obtain his release.
Next, Ms. González Peñas.
Thank you very much, President. The situation in Venezuela is highly complex, and any measure that is taken has got to be focused on improving the living conditions of the Venezuelan people. We are of the view that everybody must get involved in trying to promote the respect of human rights. It is absolutely fundamental. We need dialogue, and we need to scale back the tension that exists in that country. As the High Representative said this morning, we support the efforts that have been made, and as Mogherini said, we think that the economic and social situation of the country requires dialogue, working towards peace and establishing proper democratic constitutional order in the country. We think that unfortunately this resolution is not conducive to achieving these goals. It is couched in terms which simply will promote the benefits of the few through the misuse of the electoral process, and it is not focused on supporting the needs of the people. The Grand Coalition across the groups often simply vanquish the views of the Greens or the GUE, and it is absolutely essential that our views are factored into dialogue, and particularly so in a responsible position such as this. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Jáuregui Atondo.
Ladies and gentlemen, the resolution that we have approved is a balanced one. The left also needs to speak out against what's happening here. The left also needs to speak out against abuses, the fact that power is being abused, democracy, because after all, we need to make sure that Venezuela is a democratic country, and our political group has decided to support the resolution because in the resolution we talk about the fact that the government of Venezuela is abusing powers vis-à-vis the National Assembly of Venezuela. This has to be said, it has to be stated. You have to be courageous to say it, but we have to remember that this situation the problems with democracy are so huge in this country, and we need, of course, a dialogue as well. Government and opposition need to negotiate. They need to come together in order to bring this country or lift this country out of the current situation. So what we have here is a balance. We have on the one hand the fact that we speak out against abuses, and at the same time we are also calling about for dialogue together with the European Union and some of the previous Prime Ministers of Spain. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. The resolution on Venezuela has a hidden objective. Apparently we are seeking solutions, but actually we are intervening in the internal affairs of a democratically elected government of a sovereign country. And there is an assertion that there is no proper separation of powers. But the reality is that we are engaged in a discussion about the option of recall of the president. Now, it is absolutely vital that we respect the freedom of that country and the view of the Supreme Court. There are a number of people who have been detained, but in the position we find ourselves in, I think it is essential that we demand that there should be dialogue rather than violence in Venezuela. And in the summit, I think, of the Latin American countries, we need to ensure that we demand respect of international law and democracy, and it would be quite wrong for us to get involved in trying to distort the results of the general election.
Thank you, Mr. Mamikins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As one of the co-authors in my political group of this resolution, I must say that after the death of Hugo Chavez in 2013, the appointment of Maduro as president, the general situation in Venezuela cannot be described as stable. I would like to know that the attempts of the executive powers to control all the other administrative tools and the persecution of opposition members, and that together with the low oil prices is destabilizing this country. I voted against this resolution, but I could not support whether several amendments of my colleague from the GUE group. I thought they were too populistic, but together with my political group, I voted for.
Edustaja Makovei.
Next speaker, Ms. Makovei.
Mulțumesc.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Venezuela is one of the countries with the largest oil reserves in the world, and right now it is experiencing a financial collapse. Yes, the price of oil has gone down, and all of a sudden Venezuela is experiencing a profound crisis with no end in sight. Inflation is 400%, people have nothing to eat, prices double every day. The people take to the streets and shout, "We're hungry." What are the authorities doing? They respond with tear gas, they beat them up, and they chase them away. This is not a response to hunger. The response is a policy that would create decent living conditions and provide the necessary food reserves. This is the outcome of the failed policies that have been implemented over the past 17 years by the socialist governments there. No European aid should go towards Venezuela because we do not know what is going to be used for. If for the people, okay, but if for politicians, no thank you.
Now, Mr. Pospisil.
Děkuji pěkně, paní předsedkyně. Thank you, Chair. I supported this motion. I'm convinced that the role of the European Parliament and of the EU in international affairs is also about supporting democratization processes in countries that are partners to the EU. In the case of Venezuela, it is obvious that it's a country that is on the brink of civil war, that has huge economic problems that were described by my predecessors, and therefore I think it's good that the European Parliament has adopted this resolution that offers the parties of the dispute in Venezuela debate, a dialogue, and that hopefully these two parties will take part in this debate. It is, however, necessary to say that the President Maduro is responsible for the situation, and on the other hand, we have the democratically elected parliament that should be our partner in this process.
Mr. Mélenchon, here is a resolution that is pointless. I wonder in what country governments are called dictators when they lose elections and they recognize it, and when they lose a referendum and recognize it. We're talking about opponents who store bombs. If you're going to do that, then you have to call terrorists political prisoners as well. Perhaps Mr. Maduro should have whipped this opponent, because then you would be turning a blind eye, like in the case of Saudi Arabia. And yet you mention someone, yes, a Saudi from the UN committee who is pointing the finger at Venezuela. The truth is that you only focus on those who defend the poor. You discriminate against them and you point the finger at them. This is all part of destabilization being carried out by the US that carry out institutional coups d'etats like they did in Guatemala, Brazil, Honduras. And all of this is just a kind of international propaganda carried out by the US of A. It has no value. Thank you very much.
Ja, edustaja Marias.
Mr. Marias.
Mr. Marias, the huge drop in oil prices has dealt a huge blow to the Venezuelan economy. As I said in May 2016 in plenary in the European Parliament, when I said that the EU had to be neutral and objective when it comes to the political and social situation in Venezuela and to stop meddling in the domestic affairs of this country. Unfortunately, the EU throughout this whole period has been subjective in its views, and this is reflected in the EP resolution we're talking about. It is subjective and one-sided, and also because it's meddling in the domestic affairs of Venezuela, and also because it is not contributing to solving the problems in Venezuela. It is just adding fuel to the fire, because it is undermining the achievements of the people of Venezuela, where property has been given to people, and that is why I have voted against the resolution on Venezuela. Thank you.
Last speaker in this matter, Mr. Korwin-Mikke. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, President. I voted in favor of this resolution because I think it is worth pointing out how dramatic the situation in Venezuela is, where we have a crazy communist ruling, and the opposition is basically as crazy, and the reasonable people are just not being listened to. However, I voted against one of the items because there was a country that was in a similar situation and got out of it. That was Chile. That was Chile under Allende, and then due to Allende being overthrown by General Pinochet, Chile became one of the richest countries in South America despite having no oil. So I voted against the item that spoke about excluding any juntas. Thank you very much.
Next, endocrine disruptors. State of play following the court judgment of 16th of December 2015. And the first speaker is D'Amato. You have the floor.
Edustaja D'Amato, olkaa hyvä.
Mrs. D'Amato, you have the floor.
Ok. Da oltre 2 anni e mezzo è scaduto il termine.
the Commission was supposed to adopt delegated acts in order to lay down the scientific criteria on endocrine disruptors, and this should have happened 2.5 years ago. There was a very clear deadline, but an ad hoc scientific committee set up by the Commission itself a few years ago had already put forward a full proposal based on 3 years of work by experts. But the European Commission never factored this in. It openly violated European law and the treaties, and the European Commission felt the need to carry out an impact assessment. Only a socioeconomic impact assessment, which is not the right tool when it comes to taking scientific decisions with an impact on health and the environment. I cannot tolerate this arrogance of the Commission for any longer. And that is why I support this resolution. The European Parliament is the democratic expression of the European people, and we would like to condemn the Commission for having failed to act and to fulfill its implications, so that we know what the definition of endocrine disruptors are on the basis of ironclad scientific criteria. We have to defend the interests of the citizen. Thank you.
Next, Madam Sandra Rodriguez.
Gracias.
Thank you, President. Up until the 13th of December 2013, we had delegated, which had allowed the Commission to determine substances which are endocrine disruptors. However, the Commission violated its legal obligations, and I think this is a threat to public health. It seems the Commission is merely seeking to gain time so that it can sow doubt in an area in which the companies in the area are experts. Nothing is more important than our public health. It is far more important than the fate of these enormous public companies. The Commission, through its attitude, is making possible the poisoning of the planet and leading to suffering and death amongst human beings. I voted in favour of this report because I wish to condemn the Commission's attitude and its position. I believe the Commissioner should take up his responsibilities and act accordingly as a consequence.
Next, Mr. Benito Ziluanga, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Let us put trade and make it more important than individuals. That is the message that the European Commission is sending out. Some chemicals can have tragic effects on the endocrine system of a human being. It can have an impact on fertility, it can cause cancer, it can lead problems during pregnancy and neurological disorders. These are only some of the side effects. Does the European Commission think that TTIP will put an end to human health protection? The chemicals industry lobbying is having a huge effect on these delays, as we've seen from leaked documents. We insist that the European Commission has the moral and legal obligation to carry out a scientific investigation which is rigorous and independent on endocrine disruptors. However, there is a lot of procrastination and dilly-dallying. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Madam Lopez Bermejo.
Thank you, President. Well, what kind of commission can remain credible when it infringes its own laws? It has published this list of endocrine disruptors, substances which can cause infertility, cancers, neuronal problems and other health problems, and here the Commission has neglected the interests of public health and the labour laws. A great deal of concern has been expressed about this, especially in the United States. The United States, of course, are not in line or do not agree with the EU approach of the precautionary principle. Now, what the Commission has done is illegal, because delaying a position as it has fails to comply with the law. That is to say, the Commission should identify these substances which by 2014 had a clear criteria for identification. This is a policy designed to, or a piece of law designed to protect public health. The European Commission, however, has failed in its duty. It does not surprise me, I have to say this, but anyway, we have tabled our amendments in order to change this.
The last speaker.
Liels paldies jums, priekšsēdētāj.
Thanks a lot, dear President. It is undoubtable that we have to carry out scientific assessments as regards to endocrine disruptors. However, taking account the principal impact of the endocrine system on the life of a human being, such assessments are really important, and I don't think anyone in this hall is going to doubt this. However, in this case, the Commission had no right to start any scientific assessments, and also the requirements of the regulation 1107 from 2009 were not met. And so we have a court judgment of 2015, and as regards the current actions of the Commission, I think we should ask the Commission to reassess the current situation.
Keskeytetään kello 5.
Thank you. We shall continue at 15 o'clock.